Number 5. The NASA Photoshop cover-up. The most recent of the incidents on this list is the accusation from prominent UFO hunter Scott C. Waring that NASA is editing archival photos to remove alien craft in an effort to hide the existence of extraterrestrials from the people of Earth. As evidence of this, he posted a photo from the 1968 Apollo 7 mission that he claims shows a UFO on his blog, saying that the craft he saw in 2013 had been edited out of the photo by 2015. As he himself put it, "Guys, I discovered this UFO back in 2013, and NASA used my website to edit it out by 2015. Now I have found them in the US National Archives. They have accidentally saved the original Apollo 7 photo with the UFO in it. The photo in question shows a black object seemingly floating below the Apollo 7 spacecraft and above the planet. The supposedly edited photo does not show the small black object." Waring expressed his concerns in the following quote, "This is 100% proof that NASA used my discoveries and used photo editing software to edit out the UFO and then add a lot of contrast to the original photo to cover up most of the detail. Then, to top it off, they no longer have the largest 5 megabyte size to download, but instead only have a tiny thumbnail of about 200 kilobytes in size. Its reduced size in quality has destroyed its usefulness. NASA has to be stopped. This kind of cover-up is very corrupt and deceitful to not only the American public, but the world." Despite these claims, the black mark can be seen in other official versions of the photo, and according to analog film experts, they say it is likely just an imperfection in the photo negative. As they put it, irregular-shaped dull marks or roundish spots on the surface of your film are likely to be drying marks, caused by the droplets of water forming in the film's surface during the drying stage. These marks are typically seen on the film backing. Films washed in hard water areas are more likely to see this problem. Is NASA really altering photos in their archives in order to cover up alien life? Possibly. Is this an example of them doing so? I'm not entirely convinced. Number 4. The Space Fireflies. During the race to the moon between the United States and the Soviet Union, one of the landmark moments of the race was the Mercury Atlas 6 mission, when American astronaut John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth. As important as this moment was in the history of space exploration, it is better remembered by UFO enthusiasts for what Glenn saw out of his window during the mission. While Glenn was flying over Australia in the Friendship 7 capsule, he looked out the window and saw what he later described as fireflies. Upon seeing this, he radioed the following back to NASA Mission Control: "I am in a big mass of some very small particles that are brilliantly lit up like they're luminescent. They look like little stars." Glenn then tapped on the window, and the fireflies seemed to react and flew away. NASA was of course worried that this was parts of the capsule heat shield collapsing, but thankfully for Glenn, this was not the case. Because the mission wasn't being broadcast live, the firefly story didn't get much media attention, being somewhat of an urban legend. However, when the next American in space, Scott Carpenter, also reported seeing the luminescent particles, NASA had an excuse at the ready, saying that it was caused by ice particles from the condensation of the ship's heat exchanger. While to most this would sound like a plausible explanation, John Glenn maintained until the day he died that what he saw could not be explained by ice particles. What did John Glenn see out his capsule window during the 1962 Mercury Atlas mission? Was it really ice particles? Or is NASA trying to hide the truth from the people of Earth? Was John Glenn right? Is it a coincidence that multiple James Bond films were also directed by a man named John Glenn? We may never know. Number 3. Shuttle Atlantis' close encounter. In an age of internet and live broadcasts, it is getting harder and harder to prevent information from reaching the public, with it usually being only a matter of time before secrets find their way out of the shadows and into the light. Such is the case in our next entry, which happened in 2006 during the STS-115 mission of the Shuttle Atlantis to aid in the construction of the International Space Station. The shuttle and its crew had successfully completed its mission and had almost completed the trip back to Earth when Mission Commander Brent Jett looked out the window and noticed, as he put it, some kind of reflective structure. He radioed Mission Control and told them what he saw, telling them that what he was looking at, quote, didn't look like anything I've ever seen outside of this shuttle, that's for sure. NASA was worried that whatever the object was, it might be some crucial part of the craft that had broken off. They took control of the cameras that were broadcasting the mission to try and get a look at what Commander Jet had seen. To the shock of all the cameras, it saw 3 bright objects in the sky. The information was picked up by the media, and NASA scrambled to come up with a suitable explanation. They ordered an inspection of the craft to see if it was a broken off part of the ship as they had assumed, but could not find any evidence of damage. When the ship returned to Earth, another inspection was ordered, but once again, no damage other than a small micrometeor impact was found. NASA has never been able to explain what happened during this mission, and seem to have made no effort at all to solve the mystery in the years since. Or do they already know what happened, and simply do not want us to be in on the secret? As disturbing as that prospect may be, it would not surprise me to learn that it is the truth. Number 2. Gordon Cooper's alien adventures. Gordon Cooper is an important figure in the history of space travel, having served as an aerospace engineer, a test pilot, a pilot for the United States Air Force, and being the youngest of the 7 original Project Mercury astronauts. He was the first American to spend a day in space, the first to sleep in space, and was the last American to go on a solo orbital mission, and set the space endurance record when he traveled 3,312,993 miles in 190 hours in 56 minutes, thus proving that astronauts could survive in space for the length of time that would be required to travel to the moon and back. He was an extremely important historical figure, but unlike many other NASA astronauts, he was not shy about talking about the various experiences he had over the years with unidentified flying objects, and the government's effort to cover these experiences up. Gordon Cooper claimed that he had seen his first UFO while flying over West Germany in 1951, but that his first experience with government cover-ups came in 1957, while he was stationed at the Edwards Air Force Base in California. He had put a crew in charge of setting up an Ascania cinetheodolite, which is a photographic instrument used for collecting trajectory data of aircraft, missiles, rockets, and other similar equipment. The equipment was set up on a dry lake bed and set to take pictures at 30 frames per second as aircraft landed. The men later reported to Cooper that they had seen something odd, and had captured images of a strange-looking saucer-like aircraft that hadn't made any sound while landing or taking off. The men were used to seeing experimental aircraft, but were unnerved at the sight of this saucer, which had hovered over them, landed about 50 yards away using 3 extended landing gears, but had taken off when they had approached for a closer look. Cooper called a special Pentagon number, which was meant for reporting such phenomena, and was told to have the film developed, to make no prints of it, and to send it to them in a locked courier pouch. However, as Cooper would later admit, they hadn't told him not to look at the negative before sending them out. He looked at them and saw incredibly high-quality images of the flying saucer. He had expected there to be a follow-up investigation, but never heard anything further. He tried to track down what happened to the images, but never found out, assuming that they ended up in the Air Force's Project Blue Book, which was the Air Force's official UFO investigation. He had to deal with more government concealment, this time from NASA, when he did his solo orbital mission in 1963. While being broadcast live on NBC, Cooper told Mission Control that he could see a glowing green object which was rapidly approaching his craft. The object was not an illusion and even showed up on radar, but when he returned to Earth, he was forbidden to talk about the experience any further with the press. The reporters brought in for the subsequent press conference for the mission were also told that they could not ask Cooper about the green orb either. Years later, Cooper would talk about this encounter more openly and discuss the fact that NASA and other government agencies were covering up several stories of UFO encounters. He even spoke to the United Nations on the subject, saying, "Authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders, so the password still is, we have to avoid panic by all means." Did Gordon Cooper really see multiple UFOs during his life? And if so, did NASA and the Air Force prevent the public from learning about these visitors from another planet in an effort to avoid panic? Will there ever be a point in history where they trust the people of the world to be able to handle such news? Much like the identity of the flying saucer's pilots, it is unknown. Number 1. Did we even go to the moon? As we bring our video to a close, we must talk about one of the most popular NASA cover-up theories out there. While several people are convinced that NASA has come across evidence of alien life that they are keeping from us, or that they have even managed to make contact with extraterrestrials, there is still an inherent level of trust involved in those theories. The idea that NASA is covering up such evidence relies on the belief that NASA has really managed to send men to space. However, there are a significant number of people who don't even trust that this occurred, believing that man has never set foot on the moon. In the interest of fairness, let's explore this theory further. The gist of the theory is that while the United United States and Russia were racing to see who could get to the moon first, the United States government built a set and filmed fake astronauts pretending to walk on the moon, broadcasting the footage across the world and effectively ending the space race in their favor. Some theories even say that famous director Stanley Kubrick was hired after the impressive special effects in his science fiction film 2001: A Space Odyssey caught the eye of the US government. He was apparently hired to direct the allegedly fake moon landing. The evidence that people have latched onto over the years includes shadows in photos that don't line up how people think they should, claims that the astronauts could not survive the Earth's radiation field, the lack of stars in the moon landing photos, and the infamous American flag that they claim appears to be flapping in the wind despite the lack of wind on the moon. Most, if not all, of this evidence has been explained by NASA, but once someone is convinced that the moon landings are fake, no explanation from NASA is going to convince them. Whether the moon landing is real or not, it is a good example of how the public's trust in a government institution can erode to the point where some people feel like they can't even take the most basic bits of information provided by NASA for granted. Number 5. Music on the moon. In May of 1969, man had not yet set foot on the moon, and the United States and the Soviet Union were still locked in an expensive race to see who could get there first. Before the Apollo 11 mission could take Neil Armstrong to the moon's surface, where he could utter the famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," there was one more mission to complete. The crew of the Apollo 10's mission was to fly in orbit around the moon and launch its lunar module, which would go 15.6 kilometers above the moon's surface before returning to the main ship and returning to Earth. The mission was considered a dress rehearsal for the moon landing that would occur 2 months later, in July of 1969. A last chance to iron out any kinks so that there would be no surprises on the big day. But the crew was in for a surprise no one saw coming. Music from another world. While the ship was making its orbit, it made its way over to the dark side of the moon. For an hour, the astronauts would be out of contact with mission control and would have to fend for themselves. Once out of contact with Earth, they began to hear strange whistling sounds coming in on their radio that they could not explain. The noise and their reactions to it were recorded, and once they were back in contact with mission control, they filled their superiors in on the situation. Many theories were offered as to the origin of these sounds, such as magnetic fields or atmospheric interference. But these theories were debunked, as not only does the moon not have a magnetic field, its atmosphere is too thin to carry sound. This bizarre occurrence didn't interfere with the mission, and it was considered a success, which led to the Apollo 11 mission achieving the impossible and putting men on the moon. But the tale of this cosmic whistling was classified, and no one on Earth knew about the mysterious space music until decades later, when NASA's archives were declassified and made available for public access. What was this strange music? Was it simply malfunctioning equipment? Or was it a symphonic congratulations from the other species of the universe, welcoming humanity to the stars? We may never know. Number 4. The Black Knight. This next story takes us through time, from the late 1800s all the way to the late 1990s, giving more than a century of lore to this supposed satellite from an alien world. In 1899, the famous inventor and physicist Nikola Tesla was conducting experiments with radio. During one of his tests, he claimed to hear a strange transmission that he believed was coming not from Earth, but from outer space. If this is true, it means that not only is Tesla the namesake for a line of self-immolating electric cars, he is also responsible for making first contact with alien life through an orbiting alien probe that had remained undetected by humanity for thousands of years. A similar story came to light in the late 1920s, when the radio engineer Jörgen Hulse also claimed to have picked up a strange transmission that had echoed back to him after a delay. These long-delayed echoes, as they were later named, still do not have an official explanation, but many theorize that they originate from the same supposed satellite as the ones detected by Tesla years before. Similar stories began to crop up from multiple sources, including a science fiction author by the name of Duncan Lunan, who claimed to have decoded messages from the Black Knight satellite, which had revealed the existence of an alien race in the Epsilon Boötis, a binary star system in the Boötis constellation. In 1954, a UFO researcher claimed that the United States Air Force had reported that they had evidence of 2 satellites orbiting the Earth, an unusual claim since no country had yet come up with the technology necessary to launch a satellite. In 1963, an astronaut named Gordon Cooper reportedly called in a UFO sighting while making his 15th orbit during the Mercury Atlas 9 space mission. However, this incident is notably missing from the official NASA mission log. The seemingly biggest boon of evidence came to light in 1998 during the STS-88 mission to the still under construction International Space Station, where the first US module was delivered to the ISS, making it an important mission in the history of space exploration. During the construction, one of the astronauts saw something unusual floating above the Earth and managed to snap a picture of it. This photo was latched onto by believers in the Black Knight satellite as proof of its existence. But as they often do, NASA decided to be no fun at all and crap in everyone's oatmeal. NASA claimed that the photo most likely showed simple debris. Space journalist James Oberg, a man with possibly the coolest sounding job title ever, theorized that it was a thermal blanket that had been confirmed lost by the mission that had made its way into the atmosphere and gotten tangled up into a strange shape before eventually burning up. Is there a satellite of alien origin orbiting the Earth that NASA doesn't want us to know about? Or are all these stories merely a combination of technical issues and enthusiastic theorists? Perhaps this is something to debate in the comments below. Number 3. The Brookings Report. In the year 1960, NASA's Committee on Long-Range Studies partnered with the Brookings Institute to create a report for the House Committee on Science and Astronautics titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. Not surprisingly, when talked about in general conversations between UFO and alien believers, it is referred to instead as the Brookings Report. This section theorizes about how the public would react to the discovery of alien life, and how it would affect society, and how the decision would have to be made on whether or not such a discovery would be made public. Some choice passages are as follows. Anthropological files contain many examples of societies, sure of their place in the universe, which have disintegrated when they have had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies, espousing different ideas in different lifeways. Others that survived such an experience usually did so by paying the price of changes in values and attitudes and behaviors. Studies might help to provide programs for meeting and adjusting to the implications of such a discovery. Questions one might wish to answer by such studies would include: how might such information, under what circumstances, be presented to or withheld from the public, for what ends? What might be the role of the discovering scientists and other decision makers regarding the release of the fact of discovery? While it is important to note that the report does not state whether the government should or should not cover up the existence of alien life, should it be discovered, it does state that this is a choice that would have to be made. This report was developed relatively early in the history of space exploration and was presented to policymakers. So we do know that people in charge of government policy were presented with a document that floated the idea of hiding the discovery of alien life from the people of Earth. I don't think the writers of the report were trying to hide anything, but the fact that a report featuring a section on what courses of action should be taken if hypothetically alien life were discovered makes me wonder if this was actually just a way to get the answers they needed without revealing the true implications of the report to the writers. Number 2. Why is NASA altering photos? NASA has a program called Picture of the Day where, predictably, they post a photo from their various rovers and satellites onto the internet every day for public consumption. One day in late 2014, the photo they posted was a picture taken by NASA's Cassini orbiter of Saturn's moons, Dione and Titan. It is a stunning photograph, but one internet commenter found something he did not expect when he downloaded and adjusted the photo. While adjusting the contrast and brightness of the photo, he found that it revealed a huge object behind one of the moons that was giving off a rainbow-like aura. Even more disturbing, he saw the photo had been altered with black markings covering whatever it was behind the moon, proving that NASA had altered the photo before posting it. He took his claims online where they started receiving some attention, but before long he received a comment from someone he was not expecting. The person who had edited the original photo. A NASA employee who explained that the photo was not edited to try and hide any alien craft, but to make up for the technical limitations of the Cassini orbiter as it photographed the two moons. As she explained it, Cassini takes color photos by snapping 3 sequential photos through red, green, and blue filters. In the time that separated the 3 frames, Dione moved, so if I did a simple color composite, I would be able to make Titan look right, but not Dione, or Dione look right, but not Titan. So, I aligned Dione, cut it out, then aligned Titan, and then had to account for the missing bits of shadow where the bits of Dione had been in the 2 of the 3 channels. While this does seem to be a plausible explanation as to why the photo was edited, the original poster remained skeptical. He believed it was possible that NASA had ordered the photo altered before posting it, and then released the explanation once they were caught. Of course, one could argue that if NASA had taken a photo that featured a UFO, and they didn't want the public to know about it, they could have just not posted the photo at all, rather than trying to Photoshop it out and hoping that no one noticed. Number 1. What is NASA hiding at the North Pole? In 2016, a researcher came forward claiming to have proof that NASA was trying to cover up something at the North Pole. He provided older satellite images that seemed to show some kind of crater or hole at the top of the Earth. He believed that this was evidence that supported the hollow Earth theory. The hollow Earth theory claims that underneath the surface of the Earth is more land, as well as a central sun located in the center of the Earth. The claimant says that these photos of a hole at the top of the Earth, first seen in satellite photos from 1968, may not be definitive proof that the Earth is hollow, but the hole's omission from subsequent satellite photos does prove that there is some kind of entrance at the pole that NASA is trying to hide. Many explorers have tried to reach this area hoping to prove the theory's validity, but many of them did not survive the journey, and those who did came back with stories that simply cannot be taken seriously. One group claimed that the hole was real, and that once they managed to lower themselves into it, inhabited by a small race of creatures. The explorers kept their distance but reported seeing some kind of factory in the distance that seemed to be running all throughout the day and night. Stranger still were the emissions being generated by the factory, as whatever was fueling it was giving off a smell not dissimilar to ginger. Not wanting to push their luck, the explorers took photos and came back the way they came, but when they checked their cameras, they found that some kind of magnetic interference from the pole had wiped their cameras' memory cards. They came forward with these claims, and NASA firmly denied that their claims had any validity, saying that the explorers were simply mad or looking for attention. However, another government agency, NORAD, has been more forthcoming about what is happening at the North Pole, and released a report stating that it is a consistent site of UFO activity. Every year around the winter solstice, they've reported a small flying craft exiting the North Pole and traveling around the world at super speeds, seeming to visit every country on Earth in just one night, before returning to the pole and not being seen again until the next year. What is this strange craft? Is it traveling around the Earth in order to spy on its people? Is it friend or foe? What is the purpose of the bright red light shining at the head of the craft? Is it connected to the explorers' stories? And if so, why has NASA not come forward to us with information? Number 5. Aliens on the Sun? In December 1995, the joint NASA-ESA Solar and Heliospheric Observatory Mission, or SOHO for short, was launched in an effort to study the Sun so that we could learn more about it. SOHO has allowed us to study the Sun inside out, helping us to learn about its internal structure, its extensive outer atmosphere, and the powerful solar winds that blow across our solar system. SOHO was integral in proving once and for all that the Sun does not in fact wear a giant pair of sunglasses, as has been implied by several children's art projects. SOHO captures images across several different spectrums of light, most of which are then made available for public consumption on the internet. Most of these images are pretty innocuous, but sometimes, someone will see something that can't be explained, proving that sometimes staring at the Sun can be beneficial. A UFO enthusiast was looking at the photos of the Sun and noticed a black square of the photo cut out. At first, he thought it was a technical issue, until he looked into it more. Here's the story as he related it. On June 28th, I found what looked like a mistake in the photo, but looks more like a black cube that is in orbit around our Sun. Sure, one photo mistake, right? Wrong. NASA and SOHO have the most advanced telescopic equipment available. For a cube to be missing from the photo, either it was cut out by NASA to hide something, or is it a flying cube in orbit around the Sun? Crazy? I think not. How often do you look directly at the Sun? Never, because it will damage your eyes. So it would go unnoticed. However, Scientists around the world have stated there are UFOs orbiting the sun many times larger than the Earth. I have recorded 3 instances of this cube flying around in different positions this month. For a long time, it was assumed that these squares were simply a computer glitch. But 4 years later, the squares showed up in a photo again. But the idea that this was a technical issue was called into question when separate UFO enthusiasts came forward with photos from a different Soho camera that showed the square in the same spot. Is there a cube-shaped UFO orbiting the sun? Or is NASA editing out something from the photos before releasing them? If there is something there, what are they trying to accomplish by hiding it? Number 4. Neil Armstrong's alien encounter. On July 20th, 1969, history was made as the Apollo 11 lunar module landed on the moon, allowing its crew members, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, to become the first humans to ever walk on the moon. It was a landmark day for humanity, and Neil's first steps on the moon were broadcast on television, where it was witnessed by over 650 million viewers. During his moonwalk, he had access to 2 radio channels, one that would let everything he said be broadcast both to television and mission control, and another that would allow him to speak only to mission control. At some point in the moonwalk, Armstrong switched over to his private channel. When asked in later years why he had switched to his private channel and what was said, Armstrong said, "I have no comment on that, and am uncomfortable discussing the topic in any further detail." During the time that the radio communication was unavailable to the public, several amateur ham radio enthusiasts managed to tune in to the private channel. The following quotes from the incident have been corroborated by hundreds of unrelated operators who were all tuned in at the time. "I say that there were other spaceships. Those are giant things. No, 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 this is not an optical illusion. No one is going to believe this. They're here, under the surface. We saw some visitors. They were here for a while observing the instruments. I say that there were other spaceships. They're lined up in the other side of the crater. My hands are shaking so badly I can't do anything. Film it. God, if these cameras have picked up anything, what then? I didn't have any film at hand. 3 shots of the saucers, or whatever they were, that were ruining the film. They've landed here. There they are, and they're watching us." In the years since, this was denied by Armstrong and NASA, but Buzz Aldrin did say there was at one point an unknown object tracing their path to the moon. Were some of the over 650 million beings watching the moon landing visitors from another world? We may never know for sure. Number 3. NASA cutting the live feed. Another of NASA's crown jewels is the International Space Station, which, as the name suggests, was built with the collaboration of other countries in an effort to collect data and therefore raise our understanding of the universe and our place in it. The International Space Station broadcasts a live stream that anyone on the internet can watch. But sometimes the feed is lost. Sometimes this feed going down feels somewhat convenient. On July 9th, 2016, the live feed showed a bright glowing object falling into view of the camera. Just as the object is about to get into a more viewable position, the feed dropped, and a message came on screen claiming that technical issues had caused the feed to cut out. One YouTuber grabbed the footage and uploaded it. In the caption of the video, he states that it wasn't necessarily an alien craft and very well could have been a meteor, but the fact that the feed was cut just before the camera could broadcast a clear look was inherently suspicious. A spokesperson for NASA came forward saying the feed being cut was not a deliberate act, explaining that the station regularly passes out of range of the tracking and data relay satellites used to send and receive video, and telemetry from the station. For video, whenever we lose signal, the cameras will show a blue screen or a preset video slate. This explanation, of course, did little to appease the people of the internet, who had already decided that the feed was cut in an intentional effort to prevent the regular people of Earth from learning about visitors from another planet. But as far as explanations from government agency goes, this is one of the better ones I've heard. Number 2. The MJ12 Documents. When John F. Kennedy was made President of the United States in 1960, he quickly developed a reputation of not being a fan of the intelligence community. He believed that certain information should be shared with the people they were governing, and perhaps even more surprisingly, felt that some information should be shared with their Soviet counterparts, in the interest of developing a relationship and de-escalating the Cold War in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He apparently drafted and sent a memorandum in 1963, 2 weeks before his death, that requested that NASA initiate broader cooperation with the USSR in their outer space and lunar landing programs. Part of this document says that NASA would have to share classified UFO secrets with the Soviets. It has been claimed that the idea of sharing this information with an enemy state was the last straw for the intelligence community, all of whom apparently formed together to pool information and plans in a group called the Majestic 12, which was supposedly formed by President Truman in 1947 to deal with UFO activity. In documents that had apparently been saved from a fire known as the MJ12 Documents, it is stated that Kennedy has been making inquiries about the Majestic 12's activities that cannot be allowed. The document goes on to talk about how the issue should be handled, saying that when conditions become non-conducive for growth in our environment, and Washington cannot be influenced any further, the weather is lacking any precipitation, and it should be wet. Well, for a layman, this is more confusing than anything. It may be clear when you consider that wet work is a euphemism for assassination. It should of course be noted that official government agencies claim that these documents are forgeries, but it's not like an intelligence agency partially responsible for the death of a president is going to verify documents that supposedly implicate that same government agency. Was President Kennedy killed for trying to force NASA to share information of UFOs with the Soviet Union? If these documents are authentic, it would certainly seem to be the case. Number 1. The Apollo 8 confirmation. The original goal of the 1968 Apollo 8 mission was to be the first craft to leave low orbit and fly in an elliptical medium Earth orbit. JFK had challenged NASA to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and that deadline was fast approaching. So, in order to make the most of their opportunities, NASA made a bold call and decided that rather than settling for medium Earth orbit, they would instead quite literally shoot for the moon, which they would then orbit before returning home. Apollo 8 launched on December 21st, 1968, and reached the moon on Christmas Eve. Millions watched as astronauts Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders made their orbit of the moon. Despite NASA having a reputation for planning everything down to the minutiae, the plans for this broadcast were surprisingly loose. As Borman recalled, "We were told that on Christmas Eve we would have the largest audience that had ever listened to a human voice, and the only instructions that we got from NASA was to do something appropriate." The astronauts chose to take turns reading from the book of Genesis while their craft made 10 orbits around the moon. As Lovell later said, "The first 10 verses of Genesis is the foundation of many of the world's religions, not just the Christian religion. There are more people in other religions than the Christian religion around the world, and so this would be appropriate to that, and that's how it came to pass." With the more sentimental aspects of the broadcast complete and their mission a success, it was time for the astronauts to come home. Mission Control waited anxiously as Christmas Eve turned into Christmas Day to find out if the engine burn for the craft to leave their lunar orbit had worked. Word soon came from Jim Lovell confirming not only that the ship was on its way home, but something else as well. Lovell's radio communication stated, "Roger, please be informed there is a Santa Claus." In all the hubbub concerning the first lunar orbit, this news seemed almost like an afterthought. But the fact that a NASA astronaut confirmed that not only is Santa real, but that he lives on the moon is astounding. NASA never followed up on this information publicly, but what else have they learned since then? Are the legendary elves really moon people? Is the workshop located on the dark side of the moon? This is yet another example of NASA giving us bites of information that raise more questions than they answer. Number 5. The Pentagon Accusation. When the subject of aliens or UFOs comes up with the government officials, they are often dismissed with a joke about how the only people who believe in such things are crazy conspiracy theorists. But every once in a while, a government employee will come forward and make claims that such theories are not as crazy as the government would have you believe. Luis Elizondo is one such man. Luis was the head of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program from 2010 until 2017, where he apparently had access to the Pentagon's data on UFOs and had to interview military eyewitnesses of UFO phenomena on a near daily daily basis. He claims that he spent much of his time at the Pentagon trying to get his program to be taken seriously, but that he was suppressed by other branches of the government, such as NASA, for fears that news of alien visitors would incite mass panic. Other government personnel who tried to keep him quiet apparently did so out of religious reasons, with one claiming that he should stop pursuing UFOs and instead read his Bible, as such craft were probably demons. Elizondo has described seeing footage of crafts that have been able to reach speeds of up to 11,000 miles per hour, while still being able to make seemingly impossible, instant 90-degree turns. Other craft have apparently been capable of flight with no visible means of propulsion, meaning that whoever is piloting these crafts is in possession of technology generations more advanced than any currently found on Earth. Luis left his position in 2017 in frustration at the refusal of the various branches of government to brief officials or the public on the multitude of UFO sightings they have collected over the years, and the government has tried to discredit him by saying that he had no assigned responsibilities for the AATIP. This was challenged when former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid released a statement that Elizondo was indeed in a leadership role in the AATIP program. The fact that the government is working so hard to discredit someone who is trying to inform the public about a matter of public importance is disturbing, but unfortunately not surprising. Number 4. The hacker's discovery. In 2002, a Scottish systems administrator and hacker named Gary McKinnon perpetrated the biggest military computer hack of all time by hacking into 97 NASA and US military computers over the span of 13 months. He claimed that the reason for this behavior was to search for evidence of free energy suppression and any other potential cover-ups by NASA of UFOs or technologies that could be useful to the public. Once caught and arrested, there was a lengthy court case to determine whether or not he should be extradited to the United States to serve his sentence. The news focused mainly on the crime and the subsequent court case, so much so that not many people looked into whether or not he found any evidence of what he was looking for, but according to McKinnon, he did. While looking through NASA's computers, he claims that he came across a document titled Non-Terrestrial Officers. He looked at the document and found an Excel sheet containing the ranks and names of several unknown individuals and a sheet with tabs for material transfers between ships. He then searched records for ships with the corresponding names and found nothing, leading him to believe that the ships were part of a covert non-terrestrial initiative. After a lengthy court case, the United Kingdom decided not to extradite him to the United States, claiming that the crime was committed due to mental illness, and that sending him away would be a violation of his human rights. Is this really the case? Or did he find something in those computers that he was able to trade to the United Kingdom's government in order to avoid being shipped abroad? Number 3. The Challenger Accusation. On January 28, 1986, NASA launched the Space Shuttle Challenger. It had 7 people on board, 6 astronauts and 1 teacher, who had been selected to be a part of the mission as part of NASA's Teacher in Space program. Their mission was to study Halley's Comet as it passed near the Sun and to deploy a tracking and data relay satellite. Due to the novelty of a teacher in space, millions of school children were watching the launch in class when it occurred at 11:39 a.m. Tragically, 73 seconds into the shuttle's launch, Challenger broke apart and all 7 passengers were lost. President Ronald Reagan created the Rogers Commission to investigate the incident. It was discovered that the cause of the accident was the rubber O-rings, which were supposed to act as a seal in the shuttle's solid rocket boosters, but had stiffened due to the cold of the day, causing them to be less effective in causing the pressurized gas to leak and burn through an attachment strut and the external propellant tank. The combined stress caused the shuttle to be torn apart. The investigation also found a few more details that caused some scandal for NASA. It was discovered that concerns about the O-rings had been raised by NASA engineers since the early 70s, but that NASA had deemed the component acceptable despite the engineers' protests and suggestions that further reinforcement be given to the rings. In 1980, the NASA Verification Committee requested further tests on the joints the rings were reinforcing to test how they would behave at different temperatures. A test that would have exposed the Challenger's fatal flaw, but the program managers decided that such tests were unnecessary. It turned out that other missions in the years between the request for more tests and the Challenger mission had had problems with the O-rings, with them showing signs of erosion or letting in soot, showing that that they were not providing a reliable seal. NASA also claimed that all passengers had met their end instantly and without pain, but it was discovered that the astronauts had discovered their emergency breathing packs, showing that they were alive and trying to survive well after the initial explosion. A member of the commission, Robert B. Hotz, went so far as to accuse NASA of a cover-up in both the Miami Herald and the New York Times, saying that the initial statements about the astronauts and other actions by the space agency were part of a broad effort to keep the public from learning that the Challenger crew members might have survived the disaster if certain precautions had been taken. NASA denied such an effort, but as a result of the commission, NASA had to establish the Office of Safety, Reliability, and Quality Assurance to ensure that future missions did not neglect the safety of their crew in such a fatal way. Number 2. Life on Mars. One of the most common accusations against NASA is that they are covering up evidence of alien life on other planets, specifically Mars. While there are too many of these accusations to dive into in great detail, we will be looking at two in particular. Richard Hoagland is one of the many people convinced that there is evidence of ancient civilizations on Mars due to NASA photographs that were taken during the 1976 Viking 1 orbit. These photos show what has been dubbed by believers as the Mars face, a large sphinx-like object. In 1998, the Mars Global Surveyor sent photos of Mars's surface back to Earth, showing only a pile of rocks, noticeably lacking the iconic profile, claiming that it debunked the theory. Hoagland called this a load of baloney, and unearthed a NASA-commissioned report from 1960 recommending that any future discoveries of alien life be kept from the public so as to not disturb the evolutionary flow of the 20th century civilization. Nearly 20 years later, a researcher named Barry DeGregorio, who specializes in the study of microscopic life in Earth's soil, looked at photos released by NASA, and realizing how similar shapes and patterns in the photos were to Ordovician trace fossils he has photographed on Earth, claimed that the Mars pictures appeared to feature trace fossils made by soft-bodied life forms. NASA claims that the shapes are merely rock crystals which are being analyzed. The researcher claims that this is a cover-up, and that he is planning on releasing a report that will blow the lid off of the cover-up. He theorizes that NASA is covering the findings up to avoid jeopardizing their planned 2030 Mars mission. It is hard to say if Mars is or ever was populated by an alien race, but if they were, would NASA tell us if they found evidence once they got there? Number 1. The Astronaut Accusation. One of the leading causes of people who claim to believe in aliens and UFOs not being taken seriously is a perceived lack of credibility. If someone reports seeing a UFO, many people immediately assume that the person either saw an airplane from a weird angle, is lying, or is insane. Which is part of why it is so exciting when someone with a staggering amount of credibility comes out in support of the idea of alien life. Edgar Mitchell is one such person. Not only does he have 2 Bachelor of Science degrees as well as a doctorate in aeronautics from MIT, but he is also a former NASA astronaut who was the 6th man in history to walk on the moon as part of the 1971 Apollo 14 mission. In fact, he is tied with fellow astronaut Alan Shepard for the record of the longest moonwalk in history, having tread its surface for over 9 hours straight during his mission. Mitchell has not said how he knows this for sure, but he said in an interview in 2008, when asked about his opinion on alien life, that, yes, there's not much question at all that there is life throughout the universe. I'm totally sure we are not alone. He went on to claim that he had intelligence that proved, quote, that we have been visited on this planet and the UFO phenomenon is real, though it's been covered up by governments for the last 60 years or so. In other interviews, Mitchell has confirmed the 1947 Roswell incident and has described aliens as harmless little people. When asked about the former astronaut's comments, NASA curtly replied, quote, NASA does not track UFOs. Dr. Mitchell is a great American, but we do not share his opinion on this issue.